Oi 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 everyone, and welcome back to another brand new tutorial here on the channel. Dead by Daylight's new killer, The Artist, has launched on all platforms, and we are here to give you the scoop. Crow Mama has lots of abilities, lots of weird nuance, and an insanely high skill ceiling. So today, we're going to be breaking down her strengths, her weaknesses, and the best practices in how to play The Artist. First off, let's get the usual stuff out of the way. The Artist is a 115% movement speed killer with the traditional terror radius size of 32 meters. This is par for the course in Dead by Daylight. Now, to her abilities, the Artist can summon dire crows, up to 3 without add-ons. Once a crow is spawned, tap the ability button to launch the dire crow. Note that if you don't launch the crow, summoned crows will stay spawned for about 10 seconds and then sort of vanish. A launched crow can inflict damage on a survivor that is within 7.5 meters of the crow's unobstructed flight path, shown here almost like a chemtrail. If a survivor is further than this 7.5 meters, then the launched crow simply swarms the target instead of dealing damage. Survivors will also be swarmed if the crow hits the survivor through a wall, regardless of distance. And crows do travel the entire length of the map. Now, survivors that are swarmed will have their locations revealed via the murder's aura. Survivors can repel the crows via their action button, which does take about 8 seconds, and repelling the crows removes the murder's aura from the killer's sight. If the action button is released, the survivor resets their repel progress and re-reveals their location. When swarmed by crows, being hit by a second crow will do damage, also regardless of range. Now, in addition to casting and launching crows, the Artist can set up her crows as traps. If a survivor runs into a crow that is idled or stationary, they will first gain a swarm. If a second subsequent trap is ran into while afflicted with a swarm, any repelling actions are reset. Okay, so that was a ton of information. It's important to be thorough, but let's do a quick recap of the most important parts there. If a survivor is within 7.5 meters of the front of a crow in their flight path, and there are no walls in the way, a launched crow deals damage. If a survivor is behind a wall or out of range, a launched crow swarms. If a survivor is swarmed, getting hit with a second launched crow does damage. Crows that are used as traps can never deal damage. There is a ton more nuance in her abilities, so let's go ahead and discuss those a bit and dig into the meat and potatoes of general strategies. The Artist has the potential to be incredibly strong in 1v1 scenarios at loops, where she will struggle, like most killers, is in her ability to split pressure amongst multiple survivors. So to understand the next strategies, you really have to keep this in mind while playing. The basic strategy with the Artist is to lock a survivor into a loop and trap the loop, putting the survivors into a pseudo lose-lose scenario. Unlike Plague, Trickster, Deathslinger, or Huntress, it doesn't seem that using her ability out in the open or between loops is always the best course of action. It actually seems like an awful idea. For starters, it takes about 1 second to charge and place a crow, and 1 second after placing to launch that crow. And the crows are locked to looking one direction. Well, what does this mean? Well, realistically, most survivors with their assault are going to be looking behind them as you place your projectiles, and they'll simply avoid running into the trajectories of the crows. It's doubly worth noting that when spawning and launching a crow, the Artist drops to 92% movement speed. So not only would a survivor easily dodge incoming feathered friends, but they'd gain distance on you while doing it. Now, if survivors are locked to a loop, that's a different scenario. If you're at the shack, a jungle gym, or short pallet loops, you can place crows facing obstacles ready to dole damage to your prey. However, this is where a lot of players will blunder in their early hours of playing the Artist. You have to launch the crows to deal damage, which means that you'll often have to place a crow and then pressure the survivor into its flight path. Watch survivors very carefully. If you place the crow and they go left, you need to go left to pressure them back into the crow's flight path. Be patient here, as survivors may attempt jukes or spins to bait out your shot, and then you have to go through the cooldown while they get away. The timing is very difficult to master. In a lot of cases, you'll need to launch your crow when you don't have line of sight to your target. This is going to take a lot of practice. My largest tip here is to visualize the survivors and how fast they're moving, almost as if you're playing as them in that very moment. When attempting to trap loops, it's important that you're also aware of your directional pressure. A huge counterplay for survivors to use against the artist is to leave the loop when you're placing a crow. Just leave it entirely. So try and ensure that you're always kiting the survivor away from strong tiles or away from the middle of the map, pushing them towards the edges of the map. Try your best to play goalie and make them think twice about abandoning safety. An additional tip here is to try and use only one dire crow at a time while in loops. You may be asking, why only use one crow? I have 3. Well, the reason you'd use one is due to the exponentially longer cooldown per crow consumed. If you spawn and launch one crow, your ability is met with a 5-second cooldown. If you fire 2 crows, you have a 9-second cooldown. 3 crows requires 12 seconds. Sending 3 crows more than doubles the cooldown until you get your ability back, giving survivors so much time to drop a pallet, make distance, and disperse the corvid murder that would otherwise apply pressure to them. It absolutely depletes your lethality and alleviates pressure from survivors. This is especially helpful when we realize that if a survivor is looping you, they can't repel the swarm and use pallets or windows at the same time. Throwing pallets or vaulting requires letting off of the repel button, resetting repel progress. And if repelling takes 8 seconds and your cooldown is 5 seconds, it's highly likely that you could find a moment to place another cawing missile and deal some more damage. Lastly, do not overuse the ability. It is a wonderful power to have, but if you're not methodical and patient with your usage, you will waste copious amounts of time. You can easily lose 2 or 3 gens in a chase by overcommitting to using your ability. Whew, okay, as a quick recap of these general tips, the artist has strong 1v1 and information gathering skills. Using your ability out in the open or between loops can actually waste huge amounts of time and is counterproductive. Using directional pressure to lock survivors into bad loops is the way to go. Trap a loop and push them into the flight paths of your crows. Try your best to use one crow at a time, and don't overuse the ability. Now, real quick, I want to break away from general tips to quickly discuss sniping with the artist. More inquisitive players have chosen to push the boundaries of the artist by sending multiple crows in the exact same flight path to try to get a swarm and an immediate subsequent damaging hit. You can accomplish this by casting a crow facing a gen or something of that nature, and then creating about 15 to 20 meters of distance either directly forward or directly backwards. Once you've done so, you can launch both crows. The first crow will hit, swarming the target, and in some cases, the second crow in that flight path can cause damage immediately afterwards. Before we start discussing how OP or whatever this sounds, let me assure you that landing this specific strategy is not easy. There is a 0.75 second window where a swarmed survivor can't take damage from an additional crow. It just can't happen. Hence the large space requirement of 15 to 20 meters between placement. Secondarily, most survivors will move off of their location when they're hit by a crow, especially once the sniping method has become much more common. Lastly, even a tiny variation in angle can mean that your crows completely miss their second assumed hit. Even during the public test beta, actually landing this sniping strategy in public matches was not easy and happened maybe once or twice. Undoubtedly, people will want to master this tactic, and I say more power to you, but this is not going to be an OP strategy by any stretch of the imagination. Now finally, let's discuss higher level strats as the artist. At higher levels of play and against smarter survivors, the best way I've found to use the artist is not really only by trapping loops, but by launching through walls. You see, smart survivors will see you trapping loops and will leave. They will simply leave, forcing you to basically M1 them most of the time. But by placing dire crows at odd angles on the other side of loop walls or tile walls, survivors can't quite see where they need to juke or dodge. If you can hit them with a swarm and continue giving chase and locking them into that loop, This generates massive pressure, since swarms force survivors to choose between repelling or interacting with obstacles, as we discussed earlier. This could put survivors in a situation to either get a basic attack or hit them with a second crow through a wall again. This is very similar to how you would play Nurse or Pyramid Head, really, where it's not just hitting at the pallets or windows that is the strongest part. The strongest part is the element of surprise and honing in on this surprise. Truly mastering this will require that you put time into playing as the artist, but also require that you have a really great understanding of playing the survivor role. Map knowledge will also be key. Lastly, I want to discuss sniping in a different sense. Let's say you launch a crow at a generator. Suddenly, a survivor is swarmed and they begin to dart to the left or the right. You place a second crow, aim ahead of where you predict they'll be, and bingo, damage dealt. This is a lot more realistic to pull off and not too uncommon as compared to the sort of sniping we discussed earlier. Ultimately, this does require an amalgam of skills and a little bit of luck. Tracking the movement of the survivor, understanding how fast the crows move across the distance between you and the target, and hoping that the target doesn't double back. Sniping in this way works so well because when you launch your crow at the generator at great distance, the minute that crow takes flight, you're going through your 5-second cooldown before it even lands. The quick cooldown allows you to take aim and fire much sooner before the survivor can even really begin to repel their initial swarm, given that your aim is true. I've found pretty good success with this, even at a high level, and really want to continue honing this ability because I think this gives the artist a bit more of an edge than we previously thought she had. But just remember to account for distance. The further away you are from your target, the earlier you'll need to send your murder to account for distance traveled. Oh my god! Alright, and let's briefly recap the high-level strategy section here. High-level players won't fall for simple trapped loops, often. In this way, use the artist much like Pyramid Head to get hits through walls, prediction shots, etc. Fake placing traps to inspire survivors to abandon safety and flush them out into the open. And consider sending one crow to generators or hooks for the potential snipe instead of sending 3 crows for better information saturation. And in all of this, it may seem like the artist doesn't have any counterplay, but let me take a moment to summarize the best parts of counterplay that we've discussed in this video and maybe some things we haven't quite discussed. Teammates can run into crows that are placed as traps to disarm them for their fellow survivors and chase. Of course, this also means that the survivors that are running interference are not survivors doing gens, so there is a trade-off here. Flashlights, flashbangs, and firecrackers all completely disable the idle, dire crows, just like disabling hag traps. If the artist is placing a crow, you can use this time to make a bit of distance, head to the next loop, etc. And you can use unpredictable pathing to bait out shots or completely dodge shots that the artist is trying to hit, whether through walls or over obstacles like pallets and windows. I think that just about does it, though. I think those are all the prevailing strategies that I have figured out so far in my time with her. These are strategies I've seen Darva and other players use, and I've been able to condense it down as best as I can for you here, as well as letting you know her weaknesses and what to avoid. So what do you guys think of the artist? Let me know down in the comments below. If you're lucky, I might still be on Twitch giving away DLC codes. Remember, unclench your jaw. Have some water today. If you forgot to take your medication, please go take those now. And I'll be praying to the entity to see you in the next video.